Hey, it's Lisa Rothman, the founder of StopFamilyConflict.com. Okay, so the number one reason that parents tell me that they make decisions for their children instead of with their children is in situations where they feel like the stakes are so high. So in this video, I want to make the case that it is in those high stakes situations that it is actually even more important to make a decision with a child rather than for a child. And I'd like to use a real high stakes situation, which I think is familiar to a lot of parents, and it's screens. And how high are the stakes? Well, they are really high. On June 18th, 2025, there was an article in the New York Times that said that, here, I quote, here's the headline. Researchers found children with highly addictive use of phones, video games, or social media were 2 to 3 times as likely to have thoughts of suicide or harm themselves. Yikes. Do the stakes get any higher? Okay, so let's look at what happens in this incredibly high stakes situation. What typically happens when a parent makes a decision for a child rather than with a child because they are convinced that the child could not possibly know what is in their best interest, and these stakes are so high that the parent must step in and decide for the child. Okay, so what happens is the parent grabs the device out of the child's hands because they just read that article, that they just saw that headline in the New York Times. They're like, I got to get the phone away from my kid, otherwise this terrible thing's going to happen. And what happens from that power over decision where the parent decided, okay, I desperately do not want that outcome that the headline says, so I need to force the outcome that I do want instead. What happens is it does not take the child's needs into account. Why is the child on the device? And it certainly doesn't meet the child's need for autonomy. And so even if the child intellectually knows that that device has been taken away somehow in their best interest, for their need for autonomy, they're going to resist it anyway. Okay, and by doing this decision for the child rather than with the child, this is now broken trust. Do you want trust broken with such a high stakes situation? In a high stakes situation like this, I want to have as much trust as possible, because the next thing that happens typically after that phone gets taken away is the child wants to get their needs met. And frequently what happens is sneaking and lying because the trust got broken. And the only way to enforce a power over decision like that is, the only way is to get that decision to stick is through enforcement. So now we have parent as police officer and child doing everything they can to sneak around. And remember, the stakes are so high. I'm going to share with you what Dr. Yunyu Xiao, who's with the Weill Cornell Medical College, she's the study's lead author. She says that we don't know if just taking away their phone will help. Sometimes it can create some conflict in the family, and that is even worse. It's the addictive use that's important. That's the root cause, not the amount of time. Okay, so if I have a child, hypothetically, who is using the phone addictively, regardless of how much time they're on it, and I yank that phone, I've now taken the trust away, and my child is dealing with addiction on their own, and I can't get in because the child has closed me off. I don't want my child navigating addiction without me, but by doing that power over, I've pretty much set myself up for that dynamic. So what to do instead? Well, for starters, it's to give yourself empathy about what you're afraid of and how scary it is, and what you imagine happens if you don't contribute to your child in the ways that you want to contribute to your child. And right there is softening, usually for people. And from there can be spaciousness and curiosity. And I don't know about you, But that's when I can remember that if someone comes at me with a real power over energy, I'm very unlikely to listen to them. Whereas if they share their concern in an open way, but it's really clear to me that they want to work with me to figure out something that works for both of us, I've got a lot of trust. We're going to figure that out together. And I really want to be able to do that with people. And I've seen this time and time again working with dozens and dozens of families around just this issue of screen time. It's the parent forcing that is resulting in a lot of conflict, which, as that researcher said, that is actually even potentially worse. Now, I got to experience this myself as I was preparing for this video, and also while I was on a panel discussion, because while I've collaborating with children, for whatever reason, probably because of my own past, has always come very easily to me, there is this other area where the stakes feel very high and my fear gets very high, and then I want to assert my power over other people. And those other people actually, it's parents. And it's what happens. It's how high the stakes feel for me around parents making decisions for their children rather than with their children, because I am so worried about the long-term potential negative impacts of that, both within that generation and rolling forward into future generations. And so I can get really muscly. And this actually happened on a panel that I was on about screens. I was on the panel with a man who had written a book, and he talked about how people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs had not allowed their children to have devices. And he was using this as the reason that he wanted parents to make power over decisions for their children. And I found myself getting really angry about it. And I realized it was because of this fear that I helped. But boy, I just wanted to crush him. And part of the reason was also because I realized later, as if it's not infuriating enough that these people created these devices and these social platforms and unleashed them on all of us with no regard for the impact of them on the most vulnerable people and even the less vulnerable people in our society. Now, this man is wanting me to follow their parenting advice? I say no. However, all that anger and rage and wanting to crush him is not going to be particularly connecting or result in, any possibly being able to come to some kind of common ground idea about how parents interact with their children about screen use that either of us is then going to be satisfied with. So, followed my own advice there in the aftermath of all the fear that came up and my wanting to dominate him. I'm so scared about what happens to children and parents and what the long-term consequences are, particularly when people with the best of intentions act out of fear. And I just see it backfiring all over the place. All right. If you are curious about how to make decisions with your children rather than for them when it comes to screen time, you can get your very own free Screen Time Agreements That Stick kit by heading to stopfamilyconflict.com. All right. Be well. Bye for now.